This is Motivation. I'm Laurie Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Krissy Vann. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode. Today, we're gearing up for a ride through what seems to be rarely traveled terrain, talking about what it means to be a woman and aging, but in an honest, realistic, and favorable lens. It's a road less traveled, yet it's one that holds immense value and significance. While society often whispers about the decline of our worth as we age, the truth is far more empowering. Like a classic motorcycle, meticulously cared for, our value doesn't diminish with time. It appreciates. As the years accumulate, so does our wisdom, our confidence, our resilience. Our bodies and appearance may bear the marks of experience, but it also tells a story of endurance and growth. So why is it that we seldom discuss the transformative journey of a woman as we age? Why is there silence surrounding the challenges faced and signs to look for when premenopause or menopause are the next turns ahead? Why are we not sharing and preparing more in our youth on the importance of building physical strength and stamina that we need when the part of our journey comes where our bodies degenerate and decline? Why do we not talk about the beauty and strength that comes with each passing year internally and externally, rather than just focusing on the beauty that is in the rearview mirror? It's time to be a part of continuing the breaking of this silence. It's time to shift the conversation from fear of aging to the celebration of experience and building support for the challenges to come. Because just like a cherished motorcycle, our value only appreciates when we acknowledge and honor our journey. This is your motivation. Hi, dude.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's the middle of the night for me, but
We're such different timelines.
I set my alarm at 7 and I've been snoozing
Good
for an hour.
woman.
And I'm like, all right, just do it.
It's good. You won't overthink it.
Right.
Because you can't.
Well, I might still. Yeah, I don't know how articulate my brain is right now, but I will try my best.
Honestly, it's just like this one's really a conversation, which let's just kick it off. Let's just bloody do it, because here we are. Krissy's not with us today.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to be away for the next few weeks. Our gal, Rene Botha, who has been with us before. You were one of our first guests way back when.
Mm-hmm.
2, almost 3 years ago now. And about how to keep leveling up and pushing yourself in all that you do, because you are this incredible tattoo artist that I've been lucky enough to have your artwork on me. So, and we also had you on. I laugh. It was a very serious episode, but I laughed because the reason that we had you and you and I, it was just you and I that day as well, is it was after you had a huge hard left around this time last year. Almost, actually, I think it would have been a year ago, maybe even this week or so. We should look back. But it was after you Tarzaned it on the rope and broke your damn tattooing finger, working finger. And you were in the, what would you call it? What land were you living in that space and time?
An existential reality.
Ah.
And it's funny because throughout the whole year, suddenly I'll just be I don't know, shopping or driving, and I'll just suddenly this intrusive thought, I call it now, will pop into my head, and I'll just be could have just not gone on the swing. Could have just not gone on the swing.
You wouldn't have lived. You would have always maybe been I should have swung. What would it have been like to have that freedom of the swing? I don't think it would be necessarily stopping you on an idle Tuesday in the grocery store of I should have swung.
Yeah.
But on the trip, you might have been
on that swing.
Yeah. You know what a real regret in my life is? Not swinging on that rope in Belize. But it all worked itself out. And today.
Oh, go on.
Go ahead. No, you go.
No, I was
You're the guest. You go.
Oh, why, thank you.
You're welcome.
That experience came with a lot of other opportunities that, I wouldn't have today, and I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for that. And like a shift in perspective, and came with a cascade of events, actually.
Yeah, let's name some, because even though that's not what our episode is about today, because that was one of the last times that was listening heard, what are some of those opportunities that did come of that really unknown time where you couldn't tattoo? That was your income. You didn't exactly know where this was all going to lead, and how long that injury was going to be. So like, what are a few of those kind of highlights, or I wouldn't even say highlights, of the like silver linings or opportunities that did come out of that experience?
Mm. Well, I did have, I took on a project that I normally wouldn't take on. And I ended up doing artwork with, I collaborated with this interior designer of a restaurant and did these giant art prints for a brand new restaurant. And actually collaborating with the designer was such an amazing experience.
Mm.
Mostly when I'm in the studio, my clients, like the art that I do is very personal. And not everybody that I work with as a client is an artist themselves. So to actually step into a space and collaborate with someone who speaks your language was such a rewarding experience, where we almost just had to look at each other, and it's like my thoughts were beamed into her head. It was such a, like, there
Wow, hey?
was such a flow between the two of us. And I really hope that we get to work together again one day. But yeah, that it opened a whole new world for me to realize that, creativity can span, like, it can just reach in so many different directions. And of course I know this, but when you're really like zeroing in on your own craft day after day after day, your world becomes very small and almost insular in a way, because you're just so focused on this one thing. And then suddenly the universe goes yoink and just like takes it all away just to see what would happen. And
That's the sound I think your finger made, actually, when it dislocated. It was like yoink,
yoink.
yoink. Quite literally and figuratively, life is like yoink.
Yeah. I love that there's a video of it also. And yeah, I think we probably talked about this already, but the video is so unimpressive. It's just like the lamest video of me just like lamely falling into the ocean. There's no snap.
There wasn't even like a full swing. It was almost like you half held him and just slid down the rope into the water.
Yeah.
It makes it even better.
Yeah, I won't be changing my career to action hero anytime soon.
Yeah. It's just, that won't be expanding necessarily. Yeah, I remember that was, when you were working on those pieces, there was an excitement in you that was definitely shifted. You've always been like, I've always seen a lot of passion within you about what you do, but there was also this like new little light that came on within you when you were working on those pieces, and they're just stunning. And so what's the restaurant that they are within? So people in Vancouver, if you want to actually see them, you can actually go to this restaurant, eat food, have drinks, and like appreciate the pieces.
The restaurant's called the Watson, and they're on Main, and I think like between 16 and 17. No, 16 and 15.
Yep. You got her.
And the drinks are amazing. The food is amazing. I highly recommend going there. The decor is stunning. It's a really cool place, and they've been doing really well. So make a rezo, because you can't just walk in. They're busy.
Oh, fancy. So what we're really coming here to talk about today is when you and I spoke to like speaking. Sounds like a riddle. When you and I spoke to the speaking, When let's put it this way, you and I were having drinks and we were having a little hangout and we were just talking about life and checking in. And one of the things that is taking place in both of our lives is I'm entering into my 40s. You're turning 47 this month, correct?
Correct.
And so you're mid 40s, but then also like in a certain level, kind of going into the 50s. And we started talking about just what that comes with, because 40 and going into the 50s, our bodies, our minds, our souls are going through so much in that decade. And we were just talking about there's a lot of beautiful things, but there's a lot of really challenging things. And our own experiences, like your experience in that, and then also mine entering into our 40s. And then also how we just don't really talk about this, or about how outside of like, oh, like we're getting older, but we kind of just put this like blanketed idea of we're getting older. And there's changes that come in, but not really talking about how kind of challenging those could be, how beautiful again, and how like badass some of these challenges are, like our wisdom, our resiliency, not giving a fuck what people think the same way as we used to in our 20s and 30s. But there's also the lot that comes along in our 40s, like major hormonal changes. And that playing a huge effect on our, obviously body chemistry and things like anxiety and potential depression and muscle tone loss. With some of the other things, just like our metabolism slows down, like all of these really huge things, premenopause, menopause. And we were kind of like, this shit's coming down the line. And you even shared, and share as much or as little as you want here today. And as we talk about it, and there's always edits. So anything you say that you're like, no bueno, chippity chop it out. But we kind of want to talk out loud about it. Is that where and so I say that because I'm also doing a little check-in with you, because we were like, we should talk about this on an episode. And then we're now in real time. That's all we've kind of said is like, let's talk about this in an episode. So is that where your head's kind of going to in this regard of like what we want to talk out loud about?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're entering into a really interesting time that isn't really discussed much. And then, when I look at my mom's generation, it was something just pushed under the rug. These women were suffering. They were suffering silently, and nobody was talking about it. And it isn't until now, like I called my mom a few weeks ago, and because I'm pretty sure I'm in perimenopause or menopause, or like something is definitely taking a hard left here. So I called my mom, and I was like, when did you go through menopause? And she was like, she's doing the math, and she's like, I think about 46, 47. And I was like, right on time. So
like clockwork. She's arrived.
But yeah, I just I don't remember my mom talking about it. I don't remember. And when we spoke of it a few weeks ago, it was really tough for her. But nothing was ever like as a kid. And of course, you're not going to tell your kid, I'm what you're all suffering from. But I do feel like there's a sense of, just grin and bear it in the older generations. And I think we can change that. And I think we should talk about it. And I think there's a lot for us to learn, because the more I'm talking to friends of mine who are experiencing menopause, it looks different in every single person.
Yeah. So a lot of what I read.
Person. And so a friend of mine, she just gets crazy hot flashes all the time. Me personally, I just feel like I'm going insane. Like I will be cooking eggs and the yolk will break and it is the end of the world. And I'm not used to being this person. And so you're managing all of this new, it's like you're managing a new brain all of a sudden.
Right.
And yeah, your primary instinct is like, okay, this is it. I'm going off the deep end. But then when you start talking to other people, you realize, no, you have other friends who are like, yes, I also feel completely like unhinged at times. And then one day you're fine. And the next day you're not. And just knowing that, you know, there's other people that are in it with you makes such a
Yeah.
huge difference.
Yeah.
So
And
that,
normalizing that experience
mhm,
of that, okay, this is part of what I am going to experience, and to not trying and, get in that space where we're controlling it or judging it or feeling guilty because of it. Or just like
mhm,
you said, where you're like, okay, I'm becoming like, where it's like, well, if at this point, if I'm losing control, where you're like, oh, this is going to be a part of the process. We can help manage it. Obviously, there's things that we can do as people to know what's coming and what we're experiencing, and be like, oh, how do I set myself up to
mhm,
better manage that? So if I can like catch it or notice some of the tells, let's say, and you're like, oh, today my hormones might be this because I can feel that rumbling kind of thing, like
mhm.
maybe create more space or whatever it is, but judging it or feeling as though something's wrong with you. And that's really where that's the first thing we really go to often is like, what's wrong
Yeah,
with me today? Or
yeah,
like, what's now I feel this way numerous days in a row. What's wrong with me versus what's
exactly.
happening with me, what's happening
Yeah.
within my system.
What is the normal process that is occurring and that most women experience, and embracing it that way? Yeah, so I feel like that's like that in itself is just a very can be scary, um,
Yeah.
but it's definitely a huge shift. But then there's also a whole other, I think, aspect that plays into it, and that's just like being a woman who is aging and getting older, and and
Yeah.
um, and learning how to embrace this whole new person that you are. And it was interesting because I was talking to my therapist, and so I'm 47, getting close to 50, and she was talking about how, every 7 years your cells regenerate in your body.
Mhm.
So after 7 years, you're pretty much a new
A whole
person.
new person.
Yeah. So when you do 7 times 4, that's 40,
28?
4.
Nope. 7 times 4, 28.
Okay. Let
7 times 3 is 21. 7
let
times
me do
4
the
is
math here.
28. I love that. 7 times
Seven
4 is
times seven.
28.
Okay.
It's
7 times
49.
7 is 49.
Yes.
So she's like, you're coming up to that marker of like completely entering into a new phase, like you're a new person. And I think that that's a very powerful idea of recognizing that you are a whole new person.
I'm having a moment right now.
Mm, please
Like
share.
a
I
proper
love those moments.
I've known this for a long time. This the understanding that every 7 years we completely regenerate, right?
Mm,
New cells throughout. Is how I was just like, oh yeah, we just regenerate. But what that actually means, and how what that actually comes along with your energy, with just that of like, because the energy that's within those cells that's rejuvenated and generated, and the stretching and the like actual feelings, which is emotions in your body that are affected, and all the things with that regeneration. And
mhm,
so all of a sudden I'm picturing every 7 years of where I was going through, maybe something I couldn't quite necessarily pinpoint, that likely had more to do with the regeneration than
mhm,
I,
mhm,
and the fact that how can that not have an effect on you as a person, that you're quite literally regenerating every 7 years, and how
mhm,
that's not just like, oh, this like cool fact, as much as like, what does that mean? Like, what does that actually mean? for the rest of the ripple effects into how you function, how you think, how you feel, how you, I don't know any of the answers to that, but that's what I mean. Like I'm having like where I'm like wanting to go down now a rabbit hole after this. But when she said that of like, that's
you're
happening.
quite literally a different human. And I think it's a good time to reevaluate all of the ideas that you've become attached to about yourself. And that's where I am right now. So I have attached myself to this identity that served me when I was in my 20s almost, when I was this rebel punk rocker, didn't give a shit, like, you know, with my shit kitten boots and my black leather jacket. That's who I was. And that is just simply not who I am anymore. But I've just haven't updated that, the new version of me, like
the story.
The story. So it's interesting because I recently moved out of the city, and I now I live in a suburb. It's quite close, takes me an extra 10 minutes to get into Vancouver, but for some reason it caused me to have a complete meltdown because I realized my entire identity, my entire adulthood, starting from when did I move there? When I was in my early 20s up till now, has taken place in Vancouver. So suddenly I moved out of the city and I started to mourn everything about my life there. And I couldn't quite understand. And I was like, it's because I shouldn't have moved out of the city. And this was a terrible idea. But what I was doing is I was realizing that it was time for me to update the story of who I am. I was walking through the streets of Vancouver and romanticizing like everywhere I lived, all the things that happened to me, and felt that somehow that was now taken away from me because I moved out of the city. But what happened is I got older and I became a new person. And it was time for me to move on and embrace the next chapter of my life. And so you throw that in along with all the hormone stuff, and then you add what society tells you about who you are as a woman and what your worth is. And holy shit, what a fun storm to be in. But as you said, like there can be some beautiful
the perfect storm.
Yeah, there are some beautiful moments that can come out of that. But it's also tough. It's hard because you, in a sense, just don't know who you are anymore. But the fun thing is that you're in control of who that next person is and who you can become. So you decide, and you have all the knowledge and you have all the power and the awareness. So take the bull by the horns and, let's do this.
Yeah. There's so much in there that I want to comment on. But when you said about, like you question who you are, and so much of our lives as women, like you mentioned, has been told to us of like where our value is. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you're on earth and you've been deemed a gender, they're going to tell you what equates value with that gender. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to us as women, it's so much of that is on us being the caretakers, and us and our looks is kind of the big ones. I might be missing another one, but that's the one that, being all the things that a man needs you to be, because that's what the world needs you to be. And when we step into that space where the 40s and 50s and so much changes. Even just like I already know in my head that I'm going to look in the mirror and see a quite different version of Laurie, because even though I've grown up, I don't look that different from my 20s to my 30s. It hasn't been a leap. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I know that there's going to be a leap to some extent. And when we attach ourselves to that being like that, if we haven't, I shouldn't say that, if we haven't really looked at that and questioned that and really evaluated how much is my subconscious and conscious, but subconscious attachment about my worth being around those things, it's going to be, yeah, you really are going to question yourself, probably no matter what, of like, well, where do I belong in it all? Mm-hmm. But when you can't kind of really go into that discomfort of that and question it and remind yourself that like that never equated your worth. It was all just made up. Mm-hmm. It was all created for very, very silly reasons that had a lot of power. Mm-hmm. And it, like you said, can become extremely empowering, because then you really do make the swap for where your worth is and what you want and where you want to spend your time and where you want to spend your energy, and the grace that you're going to give yourself within all of these changes that are going to take place, and how you're going to be unapologetic for it. Mm-hmm. Like as a woman, I am not now that I, am like, my hormones are going to be going. I might be a bit moody, or I'm not any, like, it's like, this isn't me being somehow like a problem to the world, and that's how it can be looked at too, almost that like, I'm now that moody, bitchy, outwardly emotional woman. Fuck, I'll be whatever I'm going to need to be. Again, I'm going to take responsibility for myself. I'm going to do all the things for my well-being, but I'm not going to do it so I make the world a more comfortable place, me being in it. Mm-hmm. That's not going to be the reason I do the things. It's going to be because it's like I'm coming from really a whole space of how to take care of self, how I'm going to find my value, where I'm going to, I shouldn't say find value, because you don't need to find it. It's there. Mm-hmm. It was never not there. Mm-hmm. There's no finding it. It's just uncovering it under the bullshit that's been made up.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
For where it actually is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's, I think there's a lot of like unconscious systems that we just live in. So, a lot of times we think and we do things in a way that's just been programmed from birth, like we live in a patriarchal society, and there are just things that we take for granted that don't need to be there. And I think the more you just like zero in on that and try and tear that apart, you realize how like we're incredibly lucky, especially where we live. We have the freedom to really take control of our own lives. And but we do get bogged down by like the microaggressions of the world as a woman. But once you recognize them and you just liberate yourself from it, it's very empowering. But it's not easy. And it's a thing you manage. It's a thing that happens on a daily basis. It's not a problem that you solve. You don't be like, oh, this is no longer valid, and then you've solved the problem. Tomorrow you might run into that same thing in a different way. It's just having the awareness of it, and that's just how I've found it for myself.
That's a really important thing you just said, because I think that's the thing that gets most of us often. I know it does for me. Has not as much anymore, but it really, really was. It's like, I thought it was always like these things that came up were like a problem to solve. And once I solved it, I shouldn't or wouldn't need to have to run into it again. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like as soon as I had the awareness, the aha, I could somehow dodge it. Mm-hmm. You can't. It's what allows you to move differently. So then when it does crop up, the person saying the really judgmental thing about somebody that's, aging, or catch yourself when yourself are saying it and you don't realize even that is the microaggression sort of thing, or something sexist being said, or we kind of do that thing where we are really passive aggressive ourselves about aging. Like we'll take real digs at aging rather than it being something that's almost like an honor, because I know I'm kind of splitting off here, but as I do always, but it is an honor to grow older, because that means you're still here and you're still getting a crack at it. And I think that we've created such a storyline around aging as a negative thing. That's crazy to me, because, or it's not crazy to me, but it's like when I step back from it, you realize the disservice to it, because so many people would love to live longer and they're dying at young ages from disease or from, or whatever it looks like. And growing older and having more years to have this experience as whoever you are on this earth is like a real privilege. And the least of the most important things is, in all actuality, how the meat suit presents itself. But we put so much value on that being the thing that's like going to attract and attract and attract and attract and attract. And you're like, yeah, there is certain things where like society deems that you look a certain way, therefore you get privileges and benefits. There's no way around it. But that's again where it's like we're missing the point in the plot. And I think this is part of it, is changing the narrative in and around as we as women age.
Exactly. Yeah, because we are made to feel like you're supposed to quietly go away, remove yourself from the equation so that you don't bother us anymore, because you no longer serve us in society. And for me as an artist, as somebody who like I'm self-employed, like my desire to want to create and grow, like it's still there. I still have that fire. But sometimes, when I'm doubting myself, I'm like, okay, well, who wants to come get tattooed by a 60-year-old tattoo artist? And the answer is a lot of people. But it's that thing that you're saying, like sometimes we play that part where you're self-deprecating. You're ageist, like I'll say I'm old before you can say I'm old, and I'll somehow take the power, but we're both doing a disservice to the whole big picture. And I actually, so one of my absolute heroes is Patti Smith. And I don't know if you're familiar with her.
She's a music artist?
Yeah, she's a singer. She's an author. She's a poet. She is an incredible woman. She lived so she wrote many books, but her life really, her career really got going in the 70s New York era, where she would go to coffee shops and hang out with Andy Warhol, Bob Dylan, and
oh wow,
that whole era, which to me is so romantic and I really love.
Yeah.
So Patti Smith must be, I'm not entirely sure. I think she's in her 70s now. And recently, within the last few years, she was asked to honor Bob Dylan in some ceremony. He was getting some achievement award. And so she had to do this performance in front of royalty, in front of the whole world, essentially. And she was singing with an orchestra, and she screwed up. She froze in being so nervous and intimidated by the moment momentarily, she froze up. And then had to continue the performance. So there's an article about this, and you can see the performance, and it's so beautiful. When I was watching the performance, I almost didn't want to click on the link because I didn't want to see someone that I admired so much fail. But then when I did, and I saw her freeze up, and she was so gracious in that moment and so humble, and it was a perfect moment. It made me love her so much more, that vulnerability. And then you realize that you can still screw up.
Yeah.
And live in that moment. And it's not that she had to redeem herself. It was the moment. The screw up itself was so perfect. And when they panned around the audience, people were crying because they were so moved by her performance. And it was such a powerful thing to me because I felt like it just felt like such it's symbolic of life. You know, we feel like we get older, the stakes are higher, you can't mess up, but yes, you can. And just because you did doesn't take away your worth. It doesn't, and in fact, it just makes you more real. And that was, I will send you the link, and I'll send you the article. And the reason I bring this up ultimately is she writes, I think it's in the New Yorker, she writes about this. And the way she wrote about, she was so kind and gentle with herself in talking about the whole experience, that was what inspired me. And I think really, and you know, we talk about this a lot, but we really need to tap into that kindness and being gentle with ourselves, especially in this time where it's so easy to just come down on yourself, speak negatively, you know, call yourself, oh, I'm old, I'm over the hill, I'm irrelevant. All of just remove that, be kind to yourself. So that was a very, very powerful article, and I'll send it to you.
It's incredible. Yeah. I want to send me that video too. Even when you're telling me the story, you know, you get those body chills because everybody knows those experiences where something meant a lot to you and you took the risk and you showed up and it just didn't go the way you wanted it to go. And most of us didn't lean into grace, and most of us didn't lean into that being a part of the beauty of the moment, and to move through it and allow it to come out on the other side and hearing. And I believe that's where wisdom comes in. This is a woman that's lived a life. This is a woman that has seen things, has experienced things, and had this moment, and this big moment that she still felt nerves about, because no matter how old you're going to be, you're going to still feel the gravity of a moment. And you're going to feel nervous no matter how much wisdom and experience you've had. And she froze, but then she had the wisdom to allow it to be part of her, the beauty of the moment, and then allowed everybody else to witness that. And allow them to come and find that hopefully for themselves. And what body chill was just because I'm like, how would that have looked different in those moments if I would have allowed that in the real time moment? I usually am able to find it down the road, but in the real time moment, I can't, or haven't yet. I shouldn't say can't. I'm working on that. I'm developing that. And I think that is the beauty of time and practice of grace. It doesn't mean that you become, not only does it mean that you're not irrelevant, it means that you've had enough experience to allow you to be exceptionally, not even useful, not even relevant, but like, I can't even grab the word, but exceptionally important to all the generations before you.
Absolutely. I mean, you're like a leader, essentially. in like you're inspirational. And I think
Yeah.
for, someone like me who really, really looks up to her like her art is incredible, but the person she is also incredible. And to see somebody that you admire that much fail and they didn't die.
Their reputation wasn't
Yeah.
crumbled,
And
and
instead
you
of
didn't then see them differently because,
exactly, and instead of it having this negative ripple effect, it deepened the experience.
yeah.
It made it more visceral, more meaningful.
I think that's also too this idea that like by this time we should be impeccable. Like,
Mhm.
yes, we should have progressed and we should be at different and new stages, but like that, like in some capacity that we should no longer be learners. Like
Yeah.
that's insanity when you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are always learning, always growing. And I think,
Yeah.
my mom always told me, she's like, wait until you get older. Like your brain stays the same. Like you're still in there. The energy, the motivation, it's still the same. It's just your body looks different. And those words become more and more true the
Yeah.
longer I'm alive, because yeah, I'm still learning, I'm still growing, I'm still trying to figure it all out. I was
Yeah.
and I was talking to my nephew yesterday who's trying to figure out what he wants to be. And I'm like, I don't know what I want to be yet.
Yeah. It should always be an evolution as you grow. And I'd even make an adjustment to that because technically speaking, and not just on a technical thing, like our brain doesn't stay the same. It's also growing and changing. And and then also at the same token, like memory gets affected. Like you are losing cells in certain levels as you age, but I think what likely, and I don't want to put words into your mom's mouth, but like, it's that like what I've heard from a lot of older people is like your spirit's the same.
Yeah,
You're still in there.
100%.
Even though these things are constantly in a changing space as you get older, you are still in there. And that's where that same thing of like idea of your value, you're not finding your value. Your value is always in you from the day you are born to the day you die. No matter how your body changes and how your brain changes, you are always in there from the day you're born to the day that you die. And it just gets convoluted and complex because of all the complexities that we as human beings create in the world and our dynamics and our conditioning and all the things. But even like a little bit of a left turn on it all is like, I think one thing that I wish I would have known earlier and talked about, and it'd be nice if this did get discussed more, is like, we kind of look at it as like when you're in your 20s, you just focus on what it looks like to be in your 20s, and that 30s is the next decade, and then their 30s come. But each decade comes, even though there's no set things that take place, there definitely is a bit of a foundation that comes with every decade or changes in the body and brain. And one thing that I found helpful is knowing ahead of time things like muscle degeneration that starts to take place in your 40s definitely takes place, and how that can turn to like osteoporosis in women and stuff more than even men. And or without the gene expressions, all those different things of like, what can I do now that is a favor for my future self? And so I find that if I look at the information of what's coming down the line, I don't look at it as like, oh man, like, whereas before it was like, man, that crazy shit's going to happen, even though like that's obviously still on the radar. That's going to be tough and that's going to be challenging. I also look at it as like, well, what can I implement today in my day-to-day routine so that I have a better go at it and I make things easier on myself down the road, like strength training, for an example. Doing strength training now and like taking supplements and collagen, and like I even do creatine and like things like that to help my muscles so that when they start to when the degenerate, that it's not going to be at the same level as it would, and statistically showing they've kind of gone off of how it degenerates off of the women's from the generations before us. And that wasn't even a thing really on the radar in our mom's generations, was working out in regards, they like aerobics to like be skinny and fit, but it wasn't about muscle. It wasn't about building that tone. So I feel like I wish there was a lot more that had taken place. And I think that as women, if we start talking about what's to come and what we can do today, that we can also change potentially the steep incline, if you will. It will be more of just like, hey, these are going to be some gnarly, bumps to come, but they're not going to be this like steep mountain that's going to just like woof, which is what's kind of taking place and has previously taken place in regards to the like, also just the more we understand about what's taking place in premenopause and menopause. And I know a lot of women in the medical field are starting to take initiatives in around like acupuncture for women that are going through premenopause and menopause, like actually things to do rather than just like, you're just going to sweat it out. You're going to get real sweaty. You're going to sweat a lot. Like things to really set you up so that there is a more of a collaborative effort, and one in which you can really be a part of before these big transitions start to take place.
Right. Yeah. And also just knowing what your options are, know what different things are available for you depending on what you're going through. Like some women prefer going on hormone therapy. Other women can't actually go on hormone therapy depending on what is happening in their bodies and what they're predisposed to. Some women want to do all natural, and some women just want to sweat it out, but also be able to talk it out. And I think it's important to know that there's not one way to go. There's just so many different ways through this. But whatever direction you choose to go, like, somebody else is in there with you. So building that kind of network, I think, is really important.
I love that. It's the truth. There's no one size fits all. You're like a unique individual that has unique needs. And even though that it's like, even for my mental health, I always refer to it as like finding my recipe. And I think it's the exact same for your physiological needs, is like everybody has their own recipe, and try different things on, be consistent with it, give it time enough to see what works and doesn't work. It's not going to be one of those things like tried for a week, didn't work. You're right. I tried, working out at the gym. It's crazy. I didn't have six pack. What? After a week, So it's also one of those things where you're like, your hormones can't necessarily level out because you gave a good week crack at it. So it's like, whatever it is that you're doing, give it time, be consistent, and start, small and add on to it. But know that just because something worked for your close buddy, it's not a guarantee. And that doesn't mean that nothing's going to work. It just means that thing wasn't the thing, but it does it can offer you hope that you'll find your thing. Yeah. And sometimes it can feel like a needle in a haystack, but I think the more that we speak to it and speak about it, because the medical world has never been really focused on women's needs. It's come a long way, but, there's just so many of the studies are always done around men. So many of the really anything's to the convenience of men, to the well-being of men, like even birth control, like all that. I was always focused on like, just have the women handle it, but it's never been about our health. Yeah. Like that's always been about like making sure that, like our fertility is convenient. Yeah. And so it's all those things of like, when we really advocate for our own needs is where you end up asking enough questions of the medical field and doing your own work in regards to even just like treatments outside of Westernized medicine, right? And like the core of things, and you just get really curious. And I think that's what that conversation was. But when we were having our little visit and drinks, was just like, what's going on with you? Well, things are getting weird and changing, and things are, and it was like, yeah, we're headed into different realms and spaces. But there's also like, and actually I'll share the ones that I wrote down. I I agree with all of them, but it was like one that I just got from a gal an article that was written. But like, there's also so much badass shit that comes with going into those decades of your life. And I'd say these are like really predominantly really start to the seeds are put in your 30s, and you've got that growth in your 40s and you really leaned into it. And these are things like you make decisions for yourself. You care about what makes you happy and not what makes others happy. And you start to tame that inner critic and you strengthen your hype woman inside. Your gut instinct takes the lead. You recognize perfection is not the point, but progress is. You reclaim your silly and your joy. You ask for what you want and deserve. You've built resiliency. You let go of people that no longer belong in your life and the one that you want to live. You let go of guilt. And you rock your own style and you experiment with what makes you happy. Those are just some. I love that. You know, of like the shit that also is like, and it's almost like one of those things that you're like, if we can turn down the volume by being proactive in and around these things that are the more, you know, that just come along with our bodies changing and just part of how it works is within our systems, but we can crank the volume up on all these other areas. I feel like that's where the narrative can get really changed as well, of like, oh, you know, like going into my 40s, going into my 50s, and that narrative being about like, fuck yeah, I am entering my like powerhouse time. And there's going to be some challenges, but that's only going to make me, like you said, more resilient. In earlier in our conversation, where you're like, these were things that were like, this like really showed me to take my power back. You know, look at the story. It's not my story anymore. So what is my story and the possibilities of all of that? Like, I really feel like my 40s are going to be some of the most, for lack of a better word that's coming to my head, or maybe the best word I actually think it might be, is boundless. Like, I feel like it's a really boundless time to enter.
I'm remembering now, I asked you maybe a month or two ago, realizing that you were about to turn 40 this year.
Yeah.
And I remember asking, how do you feel about turning 40? And you said, I feel like I'm about to kick the door down. And I just love that so much, because it just embodies everything that I think is so important. Like, that's how you have to enter into that new chapter of your life, is just go kick the door down and own it. And it's inspirational. And that's why I love having friends like you, because you remind me that, you know, we're in this together. And as long as you embrace it.
Yeah, we are.
You got this. And we all got each other, you know. That's
100%
so powerful.
Yeah. No, I think that's just it. That's why it's like the more that and that's the other thing too. If we hadn't have talked about this, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that we spoke to about this, but just that of like, when we talk out loud, sometimes we're having so many conversations in our head as well that we don't know how much of it we have to actually take a little action around. And when you were just like, I'm going through some weird things, I'm not quite sure where to pinpoint it and all those different things. And then, like you said, I met with my therapist and was like, we nailed some things. And like you shared today, the story and all those things. I think that's just it. Keep having conversations, be honest with where you're at. Cause you could have said, you know, when I'm like, I'm kicking the fucking door down, like I'm kicking it open, I'm kicking it down. And I'm like, I'm doing all the things and no one's getting in my way, you know, from a loving place, not from a, you know, like, but just from a space of like, I'm just going with full power. And you could have been like, yeah, me too. Because it's like, how are you feeling about, well, and you were just like, yeah, I am not in that space right now. I am and it's like, okay, like, let's talk. And I think that's also too, what I always love about all of our people, especially you and I go deep, like immediately in our conversations, and you and I get very, very, very honest in our conversations. That's how we also process. Cause we always kind of are like, look, if I'm honest, I know where I'm starting from. Cause then you and I kind of give each other like a little tidbit of like, hey, maybe you could look at it this way. Cause if I'm giving you a bullshit answer, well, I can't utilize your wise words.
Right.
Like I can't, because you can't bring your piece of wisdom that you've accumulated and apply it to my situation if I'm giving you a bogus situation or not the full truth. So I always just really appreciate that. And I highly suggest finding that. If you do not have that, find those people in your life, because you get to say the thing honest out loud. You get a safe space to say it. You get an encouraging place to say it. Not like just be strong or shake it off, or, but like, okay, tell what's, okay, well, let's look at this a couple different ways or whatever sort of thing. But just that of like, that's also too where I found I'm like, oh, maybe there's more for me to look at here. Because when I said it out loud, I'm like, oh, what is that? And you go, find the support, whether it's the continued conversation or with a professional. And you get the feedback you're really needing and looking for from yourself. And then you get to move in the direction that you really want to go to in that next kind of like evolution of it all, that's exactly what you are. 7 years, moving into your 50s, going into it, you are in an evolution of yourself, moving out of the city, as a homeowner and all these different things. Like you are literally in a growth spurt within yourself. Growth spurts are painful. You have them in your body, they ache. Your legs, when you think back to young, I'm always like, physically, mentally, emotionally, growth spurts are uncomfortable and at times painful.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's super uncomfortable, but lean into it, and I think there's a lot to find there. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to see the direction, like specifically where I am right now. I feel like I'm in a bit of a soup. And I remember talking to Krissy, and she was like, "Oh, how exciting for you. I can't wait to see where you go with this." And I'm like, "This is why I love you." Because she instantly saw the opportunity for growth and all these exciting things that can come out of this. Whereas I just felt grumpy because I'm sitting in a puddle of goo. But yeah, it really is. It's good to have, your cheerleaders around you sometimes.
Huge. I don't know what I'd do without y'all. You said that time. I don't know. Yeah. What would you say is, are you gonna sing with me motivation maintenance? So you can go high, you can go low. It's just motivation maintenance, but you can't sing well. That's the only rule.
Motivation maintenance. Okay, yeah,
So
I can do that.
Okay, 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3. Motivation maintenance. Wow, did you nail that?
Nice and dissonant. I was going for moody.
That was great. That was amazing. Especially that you were, because as a professional singer, that was a big ask of you to really not nail it, to nail it. And you nailed it.
Well, it's too early for me still to do.
Yeah, maybe that was that helped things for sure.
I'm gonna wake up like in an hour and be like, "What happened this morning?"
You're still drunk, and you're like, "What did I do brunch? We brunched today, didn't we? Like, what did I even do?" 100%. So what would your motivation maintenance be for anybody that is really in a big transition in their lives, as far as anyway, it's your motivation, you choose.
Well, I will speak from being in the soup, just being in that uncomfortable place. start with the little things. Make your bed, drink water,
Yeah.
wash your face, take a shower. Do the little things, and they all add up. And so if every day you do the self-care, you put yourself in a position to build on those good choices. And that's just where I'm at. And again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, you think when you're later in life, you should have it all figured out, you should be at the top of your game. That's just not how it works. Sometimes you got to start back from the basics and just know that it's not a step backwards. It's you're moving forward. You're building your that thing that the caterpillar does?
Cocoon.
Yeah. You're a cocoon.
Your cocoon. We did an episode on this,
Yeah.
actually.
Oh,
Cocoon
you
to the
did?
butter. Yeah, from caterpillar cocoon to the butterfly stage.
There
You're in
you
your
go.
cocoon.
Yeah, that's what's happening. So, yeah, I would say start small. Start with the small little decisions.
Mine would just be from a space. So being in the out of the cocoon stage, I would say when you have the capacity and when you're in that space where you're seeing with clarity and you're do your future self a favor by looking towards not just what your self needs in this moment, but what your future self get information of what's going to take place in the old meat suit, what that means to be a human being, and and that doesn't just mean for a woman, for a man, non-binary, whoever you are. It's like, look at what it takes place coming down the line, and don't take that as hard fact and things of like, oh, this is exactly what it's going to look like. Have it just as a point of reference. And then ask yourself, what would I need to do to supplement into my day now, whether that's actual supplements or actionable steps, so that I'm going to be on the team of my future self. I think that goes a long way. I wouldn't suggest doing that necessarily when you are in the soup. That's too big of an ask of a person. Of your person. That's only when you're in a space in place of like groundedness, clarity. You're in the butterfly stage. That's when you have a capacity then to look forward with that kind of, I wouldn't say clarity, but you can look forward and take that on and have the energy and capacity to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just collectively of like, talk about it. Just say it out loud, say those insecurities. And there's no hard and fast rules. Like, I'm okay with aging and I get Botox. Like, that's the truth. I'm okay with myself getting older, but I don't like that I look tired. And so I get Botox so I don't look tired. I'm a very expressive human. My forehead has like sand dunes in it that pushes my brow down. That makes me look like, and it feels like I'm tired. And so those are things, but I love my crow's feet. I love my laugh lines. I love that that's an expression. And those are my stories of all the things. And so it doesn't have to look like a thing too, where it's like, well, you're a hypocrite because you do this, or I'm a hypocrite because like, you got to do you, but definitely ask yourself, why am I doing those things? What does it mean to me? And rechecking in. Does it still make sense?
Yep. Do what makes you feel good in your body.
Yeah. But ask yourself why it feels good. Is it good because you get the outwardly satisfaction of validation for people being like, you don't look your age? Great. Thank God. No, look your age. Badass. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing to look your age. I used to think that was such a compliment. And I used to give that compliment. And I really work hard to not anymore and to not see it in that way, because I think it's a beautiful thing to look your age. You've earned your age. You've lived a life. That's a badge of honor, not a badge of disgrace. And so just that of like, whatever makes you happy, but ask yourself and question, what about that does it bring you validation, or does it bring you actual joy, actual fulfill? Like, those are different things. And so, but at the end of the day, do you experiment, find your recipes, constantly change that recipe, because you're going to need to as time goes on, and know that that's part of it. That's It's not, and it's a lie that tells us it's like, you got to stick to the one thing.
Yeah. That's
So
well said. I really like the idea of be open to tweaking your methods and your daily routine, what you're doing. It's changeable, it's movable, and
yeah.
maybe one day you need a bit more of this, tomorrow you'll need a bit more of the other thing. And that's okay. That's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your being is a living organism that's constantly changing. And so it's one of those things where, like, even just sometimes I notice that I just need more sleep. So I'll let myself sleep for like 10 hours or nap for like 2 hours. Like, I'll let myself, because I'm just like, that's what your body's being like, Laurie, I need sleep.
Yeah.
And my, a year and a half ago, I would have been like, you got to push through, you got to, but you're like, I'm not being like, it's not me feeling lazy, but I had to learn how to decipher. Is this me just not wanting to do the things and feeling lazy? Or is this my body calling in a deep way for deep rest? And then listening. So it's just that same thing of like, you are this like living being organism. And so asking yourself why and going into a place of listening and allowing, you just, because life is tough enough. The body is complicated and complex. We do not need to fight ourselves more on everything. Do you know what I mean? We're just in this constant battle within ourselves and with ourselves. And so find out, how do you be your body and your brain and your soul's teammate? Be its fucking teammate. Don't be that like dodgy coach we all had in high school that just screamed at you.
Yep. Well said.
All right, dude. Thank you again for coming on, joining, sharing your experience, sharing your everything. So we love having you.
I'm happy to help. Please edit out all the inarticulate moments of me doing bad math.
Anytime that's in there. Actually, that's the only thing I'm keeping. If I'm truthful, this is just going to be a monologue of me speaking. and then they'll just crop up math. Yeah.
Love it.
The power of editing.
Yeah.
You've just listened to the Motovation Podcast with your host, Krissy Vann, and me, Laurie Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motovation Podcast and visit our website at themotovation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.